Welcome back to Awaken Exchanges. I'm your host, Jay Rich, and I want to thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to try to be a little bit more concise in these openings, emphasis on try to be, while still letting you all know how incredibly appreciative I am for all of you tuning in and sharing this podcast with your friends. For those that are joining us for the first time this week, I want to give you a very warm welcome. I think that you're in for a real treat, actually. You listeners are and will continue to be the most important part of this podcast, and I appreciate each and every one of you more than I could ever say. So please remember that if you have any suggestions for topics or guests, I do listen to the listeners. So you can contact me from our website, or you can also contact me on Twitter at Awaken Exchanges. Today's guest is world-renowned astrologer Jeff Harman. Jeff uses a unique blend of classical, Vedic, Naadi, and Kabbalistic astrology to get a comprehensive view of an individual's astrological makeup. We're not talking about what's your sign kind of astrology. When you listen to him explain about the planets and stars, you can't help but be curious about how much we don't really know. So I'm thinking that this is going to be the first of 2 episodes with Jeff, because after our conversation, I couldn't help myself. I think I'm going to go ahead and book a personal reading for myself and share some of that with all of you so that you can get a glimpse of what you're in for and an idea of my own personal reactions during his revelations, so you can see how accurate it felt, at least to me. As for today, I hope you enjoy learning about the different kinds of astrology he uses and how they work. Oh, and just a little fun side note. I decided to bump up this release number so that it would be on a numerologically significant episode for me. Why? Why not? I just thought it was a little fun. So now, before we get to the show, I want to thank each of you personally for your support. If you have the means and would like to contribute personally, please take a look at our Patreon page. There you'll get access to exclusive content and deals. Your personal support there and through the purchases at Awaken Vapes are incredibly important to the survival of the Awaken brands and the growth of the ARC. Words can't express how grateful I am for each of you. As for our other sponsors, Magic Mind is a magical combination of ingredients designed to help you improve your energy, focus, and productivity. Hear more in just a minute, or better yet, go to magicmind.co/awake and use the promo code AWAKE20. That's AWAKE20 for an incredible total of 40% off your first order. That's just $3 a bottle, and it makes a great way to start any day. Of course, it also pairs really well with the original Awaken Vapes, which has been the first of the Awaken brands, and it has been helping you modulate your high with CBD-only, high-terpene vape products since 2019. And let's never forget that Genesis Pharms is still making the highest quality medicinal RSO among many other fantastic products, and starting all the way back when it was just the medical marijuana community here in Oregon. And remember, if you enjoy this podcast, please follow us on Spotify, subscribe to us on YouTube, or follow us wherever else you're listening. And please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. I know every podcast says that, but that's because it really does help spread the word. You can also support us on Patreon or connect with us on the social media of your choice. We are at Awakened Exchanges on Facebook and Instagram, and at Awaken Exchanges on Twitter. All right, now, stay tuned, and thank you for listening to Awakened Exchanges. I still can't say enough about Magic Mind. They have been nothing but generous and kind since reaching out to us, and when you add good people to a great product, you're certain to have a winning combination. Magic Mind has designed the world's first productivity drink, a morning ritual built to help the creative workers of the 21st century. Magic Mind's science-backed blend of matcha, nootropics, and adaptogens work together to get you into that flow state faster, all without the anxiety or jitters that can come with caffeine. All you get is the focus and productivity. So what else could you ask for? Well, visit magicmind.co/awake today and learn more about what this elixir can do for you. Better yet, use the promo code AWAKE20, that's AWAKE20, and get a total of 40% off your first order with that discount code. That comes to about $3 per bottle to help bring unbeatable focus and clarity to your life. every single day. Next, we have Genesis Pharms. Founded on the belief in cannabis's ability to heal, Genesis Pharms is more than a brand. They're a compassionate community of like-minded folks that bring top-quality cannabis products made with love and care. You can find their products on the best dispensary shelves across the state of Oregon. Their RSO is the highest, most consistent quality in the state. Their tinctures are second to none, and their personal massage oil will have you and your partner coming back for more. Double entendre intended? Possibly. You can find them on Facebook and Instagram and ask for them in your local dispensary today. You can even learn more about Genesis Pharms by listening to Sean on our very own Awaken Exchanges episode number 3. That brings us to Awaken Vapes, bringing you the highest quality CBD vape cartridges since ringing in the new year back in 2019. I became passionate about cannabis after a car wreck left me with major migraines, and Western medicine had failed to alleviate the symptoms. After about 2 years, a very compassionate doctor decided to ask me if I'd ever smoked cannabis. Having only tried cannabis a handful of times in high school and college, it was this off-the-cuff recommendation that made me realize the amazing health benefits that we've been missing out from this wonderful plant. Please visit www.awakenvapes.com today, where we still offer our 3 custom terpene formulations, but now with an enhanced flavor profile to go along with those original, powerful effects. And don't forget, you can always email us about any wholesaling or white labeling opportunities. Last but definitely not least, the absolute best way for you to help support this podcast would be by joining our Patreon page. There you're going to get access to exclusive content and amazing merch deals, and you truly are the most important part of this podcast. So joining in the exchange is the absolute best way to become a part of it. Thank you, and I hope to see you all again here in the future. Welcome to Awaken Exchanges. I'm your host, Jay Rich, and I'm very excited to be welcoming world-renowned astrologer Jeff Harman to the show. Welcome, Jeff, and thank you for joining us today.
You bet. Thanks for having me on.
Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about you and the work you do?
Well, I've had a long, winding road through life. Most people do. And my journey kind of started in the mid-'70s, where my mother was really nailing a lot of different things in my life, particularly girlfriends. And that's where, I said, come on. I said, what are you doing here? This is a little more than mother's intuition. And she said, I'm doing their astrology. And I said, well, come on, that stuff doesn't work. I was pretty skeptical of it. And she laughed and she said, well, give it a shot before you knock it. And I did. And it was pretty amazing. So, that was BC, before computers were really doing astrology, and we were doing it by hand, pull out the ephemerises. And it was a lot of fun. And
I actually had to work with some of the ephemerises myself back when I was learning, just to try and get that manual knowledge in me. So
yeah, it's a good thing to do. That's right. Yeah.
But you were,
in fact,
go ahead.
I still do Naadi astrology by hand because
Really?
I don't have a computer program yet that fully does it. Yeah, I have a good Vedic astrology program, but I have one a sheet that I have that I made up, actually blank, and that's the way it is. Yeah. I mean, even in the 90s, we were still doing Vedic astrology by hand. I mean, I remember sitting there with different teachers. We'd draw it all out by hand, get the books, and it was a lot of fun. So that's how I started. And I was really lucky. I had a studio. I was doing all different kinds of work. I was doing logging. I was doing, I grew up in the North Woods. It's like Dukes of Hazzard up there. I was driving semis before I drove cars. And my dad had a logging company. And it was a lot of fun and crazy up there, North Woods. Yeah, just near Canada, up by the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But so astrology was really foreign to my life, when you think about it. And then as time went on, and I actually I was always into music and sound and electronics. I always loved that, and still am, and film work. So it's a lot of fun, and production. I really enjoy production. And I had a studio through the 80s. And I was always doing astrology. And I had studied with many, many people, and I was really observing the natures of people. Like we were doing a lot of commercials and soundtracks in the studio business. And all of a sudden, I started getting a lot of phone calls from big companies, and a couple of them were religious organizations. So I was involved and exposed to a lot of different theologies and religions. And I was hired to do programs. Actually, we worked with Mother Teresa on one project, and many, many different theologians and rabbis. It was all kinds of stuff. It was really cool. And long story short, yeah, it was. It was really kind of interesting. And you see all these different viewpoints on religions. And then I'm back here going, wait a minute, everybody says astrology is the work of the devil, right? And I'm like, okay, well, if astrology is the work of the devil, according to some dogmatic religions, and yet it seems to be a sacred science that's alluded to in almost all the ancient worlds, particularly, Egypt, Chaldea, Greece. You go back into for sure, India and Southeast Asia, and Europe was just riddled with it. So, and then I ran into the three Roberts. The three Roberts are Robert Schmidt, Robert Zoller, and Robert Hand. And they were doing Project Hindsight. And of course, many people who are familiar with astrology have probably heard of Robert Hand. He's written probably one of the more famous books, which is Planets and Transits, which, I think any astrologer who starts out is definitely going to grab that book. And I'd recommend you grab that book. It's an awesome book. So my mother actually studied with Robert. And then I studied with him too. And I really like Robert. He's cantankerous. But I think the thing that they ignited is this ancient world that unearthed, not that other people didn't. David Pingree and many others in the 60s and 70s had done this as well. And of course, all the way back to the probably early 1800s, you had many different people keeping astrology alive. But the problem was it wasn't kept alive in the ancient traditions. And when I say ancient traditions, you had stuff coming out of Egypt, Chaldea, Greece, and the medieval worlds of, Italy and Rome, all the way up until the 1700s, I'd say the late 1600s, which was very consistent. There were some variables, but very consistent in its modalities and techniques. And then it completely changed in the 1800s, particularly even the 1900s, to this love, light, and clueless, your big three, your sun, your moon, and your ascendant. And it was never like that before. And it was really astronomy. And the types of astrology that were available, electional astrology, interrogation astrology, and also birth chart astrology and location as well. Amazing stuff. I mean, you're talking, you can diagnose almost anything in the world from, imbalances in the body. They called it medical astrology. And even back then, the orderly precepts in the Middle Ages were trying astrologers in court. They trot them in there by the neck and say, we're going to hang him. He's been doing medical astrology against the doctors. And it's a long time ago. And yet the fun thing is that people would show up. I actually have one book in the 1600s where a medical astrologer was being tried, and the whole half the village showed up and said, Your Honor, you got to let him go. He healed my son. He would have died, and the doctors couldn't heal him. So I'm not promoting. I have great respect for medicine and allopathic medicine and all that, but it's pretty astounding what Ayurveda and medical astrology can analyze and maybe supplement current modern astrology. So there was that, and then there's electional astrology. Of course, we know that the founding fathers of this country used electional astrology to lay the Capitol foundations and the White House. Pretty interesting stuff. So a lot of really fascinating things.
What used to be considered, scientific or, something that we should still study has just kind of gone by the wayside for a while, and it got put into that woo-woo category for a long time and just ignored. And we're better than that.
and you forget how much knowledge had actually gone into that, how much had been passed down for thousands of years.
Oh, truly. Yeah. And that's what struck me. And I think the thing that struck me also too is that I started getting into Vedic astrology in the 90s. And that was a whole nother world. I mean, you got to bend your mind around completely separate. I used to talk to Rob Hand about that. He says, you want to learn that stuff? He says, you go ahead. He says, I'm not bending my mind around that way. And he's right, but I actually like bending my mind around. It's fun because it is. And blending these techniques together, I think, gives you a much bigger picture. And that's a big topic. A lot of astrologers to this day are really not in agreement as to which zodiac is more accurate, the tropical zodiac or the sidereal. And, your sun sign will likely change. It doesn't always, but there's about a 24-degree difference between tropical astrology readings and what you'll find in Vedic astrology. So Vedic astrology is sidereal. And even that, nobody can fully agree upon. There's something called an ayanamsha, which is a strange word that means, where do we take the tropical zodiac in reference to the sidereal progression? So in other words, the precession of the equinoxes. And no one can agree. The Indian government publishes an ayanamsha called Lahiri, which most Vedic astrologers use. And I did too for years, and I thought it was really good. But what really struck me is I met an old guy who used to do Vedic astrology for the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and all those kind of guys in London. Wow. And he was from India, and he gave me an ayanamsha. It was completely different. I still use it to this day. And I said, where the heck did you get this? I said, this is really odd. I said, I've never seen anything like this. He says, well, my grandfather's grandfather's grandfather handed it down. And he said, just use it. It's right on. And I have, and it's pretty amazing. And so I always tell people in readings, I said, I might be a few minutes off on the ascendant from other astrologers, but where it really shows up is in the time periods. So it's really, when you look at what intrigued me the most about this whole conversation was not so much the astrology itself, but who the hell are we? What is astrology? Is astrology us, like the modern astrologers say, we're all Pisces and Aries and all? And I say, absolutely not. We're spiritual beings having a physical experience. And that's where you start getting into the philosophical and theology of the Vedantic and the rabbinical texts. The Christian stuff kind of starts with Jesus, right? Which is good. There's nothing wrong with that. And a lot of great tenets in that. But except what Rome has altered. But and the bearded men murdering each other, right? For the first
it happens. Just a few thousand years,
Yeah, exactly. So I really find some very deep truths in the rabbinical texts, particularly the Old Hebrew, Chaldean, and the Vedantic stuff. It's almost exactly parallel. And I mean, almost exactly parallel when you get past the nomenclature and the languages and the words and all that, and you start really decoding what does it mean. It's very, very similar. And it's all about what's that?
Oh, I was just going to say, I've always thought that a lot of that had to deal with definitions and people's understandings of the words as opposed to them trying to say different things.
Yeah. So. Well, that's right. Yeah. I mean, and again, this stuff really gets deep because you really start to find that all this story, every culture that had a reasonably deep religion always had some story of a war in heaven, and these spirits were cast down. And of course, we were part of it. And, you got to scratch your head and go, well, okay, is that true? Of course, we have the Garden of Eden story in the West. And but it's very similar in the Vedantic. In fact, I actually have a text. It's called the Veda and the Torah. It's a comparative analysis between the Bible in the West, which of course we call the New and Old Testament, right? In the West, or the Hebrews called the Torah, and the Vedantic scriptures. And the Vedas is a whole collection of texts. There's the Rig Veda, there's the
Mhm.
Arjur, the white and the black. There's all kinds of stuff there. And you got the Upanishads, you've got the Puranas. There's a lot of texts in India. And unlike the West, they haven't been censored from being, allowed to be a canon that's approved by a church like Rome. And, the Hebrew documents are also very, very old. And there's a collection of texts there that is stunning. And the knowledge there has really been hidden in a lot of ways because of persecution, etc. And what's interesting, though, is when you back it all out and look at it from 100,000 feet, it clearly seems to be right that some kind of a spiritual war happened, and the solar system becomes a matrix for the soul. And that's pretty cool stuff, because then you start getting what is astrology and what isn't astrology. Astrology seems to be the portals, if you will, almost that are interacting upon the soul. And very, very interesting stuff. So that's where I really liked the Vedic astrology, because you can clearly see the two different paths that astrology kind of went on. And it really, really did. It's very interesting stuff.
So do you tend to use Vedic as the base? Because I know you integrate multiple into yours. But is that basically where you start from?
I use them both. I really do. I find the ancient traditional, and I have to clarify that traditional astrology, other people call it classical. That's the stuff that was prior to the 1700s. Today, most astrologers use the zodiac in the tropical system with rulership and, exaltation, and then they'll get into the fall and debilitation, right? And that's it. But when you look at the ancient Chaldean Egyptian systems in Greek, you'll find that there is multiple divisions. They have not only rulership, they've got exaltation, they got triplicity lords, day, night, and participating. Then they got bound or term lords, and then they got decadent lords, and then detriment and fall. And it's really deep astronomy. And that's exactly what we find in India. That's why another reason I like Vedic astrology. They have all these divisional ways of looking at the zodiac. And of course, they're called Vargas, which just means they'll take a sign and divide it into all these multiple divisions, and they all mean something. And that always made sense to me, because I remember when I studied modern astrology, I just went, there's not enough here, and of course, many modern astrologers just keep adding aspects. They got all these semi-sextiles and all this stuff, which is fine. And they're right. There's something to it. But, your eyeballs cross after you keep laying on all these new modernized techniques, where the old stuff just cut and dried. You just get right in there, and you can see cycles and things that are going on that I think are a little bit clearer. And that's what always attracted me to it. You got to really work hard to learn this stuff. Like, I have never stopped studying, and I'm always reading books. I'm always researching, and I'm very blessed because I'm doing this stuff every day, and I've been around it for now, almost half a century. It's like 47 years. So it's yeah, and then you find out the more you're around it, the more you get in awe of it, because it's really deep. This is the code of angels. It truly is. It's not just astrology. The astrology is interesting, but I don't think anybody's ever going to figure it out. It does appear to be each soul literally has karmic, or you could say etheric energy that it carries that's linked to all these different things. In Naadi astrology, it's stunning because, when I get into reads, I'll say, geez, your dad was this way or your mom was that way. How'd you know? Well, it's in the chart, and Western astrology, the modern stuff is, your sun sign, you're a Pisces, rattle off all about all the, things under each sun sign, which is fine. There's some vague similarities to it, no question. But the sun is the father in Naadi astrology. And that's interesting because, people say, how'd you know my dad wasn't around? Well, because it shows here, oftentimes I'll see people who will have what they call a primary direction. Like if the sun is 3 degrees away from Saturn or Mars, you can tell something happened to Dad somewhere around 3 years afterwards. See, the rotation of the Earth is called primary direction. It's just a fancy term for the rotation. And each degree, each rotation after we're spanked on the rear end in the delivery room is a year. And there's all kinds of divisions in that. And this stuff is stunning how accurate it is. And, like you would say to somebody, what happened? Well, Dad died right there, or something else happened, or I got adopted or whatever, it always shows up, and you can see, which parent was more favorable and more close. And you can also see karmic linkages in past life stuff, which is really pretty wild, because when you think about that, we're all told from, the pontificates in Rome, you're all sinners and you're all going to hell, right? So, okay. So, and there's one life. That's it. No more. You're all getting punished here. Flog them. So, the point is it's not that way. And there's psychiatry. There's clinical proof of this, in my opinion, by many really smart and well-documented psychiatrists and psychologists and regression therapy therapists. And the Vedic astrology absolutely proves it. And you can get past life stuff from tropical too. And I enjoy that. But the Vedic Naadi stuff, you can really see. The biggest thing you can see is the ebbs and the flows in the life. Like there's some, and they have all these divisions of karma. Like there's some karmas, and us Westerners, we hear karma, we think bad, right? It's always got to be bad. Karma can never be good. Well, karma actually can be really good. That's just a word that means, etheric energy that the soul has come to experience. And that's what I love about the whole theology of the more ancient Naadi and Vedic astrology. And that is that we are not our astrology. The astrology may actually be us, which is totally backwards. Like everyone's running around calling you your sun sign and your ascendant and your moon. And yeah, there's something to that. But on the other hand, they actually say the angel attaches the spirit, psyche, and soul at conception to the embryo. And that means that we're not in it, but we're attached. So it's like assigned to it. And then after the period of gestation, we exit the womb, and they say the body, our spirit, psyche, and soul is permanently tied at first breath. Breath is synonymous with spirit. Try not taking breaths for a while.
Not
doesn't
fun.
go too good. Right. And so, breath, it certainly seems when the spirit vacates the body, we stop breathing, right? And you hear many people talk about NDEs, out-of-body experiences, near death, and all that. And, they try to revive them, and somebody jumps up and down or, defibrillates or whatever they do to get you going. And all of a sudden, boom, they're back in the body, and they tell these stories. So clearly, consciousness is not localized to the body. We drift out every night when we sleep. And that's what I loved about the whole theory behind the Naadi astrology. And a lot of this stuff has been lost. When England went into India at the time of Gandhi, they burned a lot of this stuff, and there was a lot sold at auctions and destroyed. But they had a lot of this stuff written down on Naadi palm leaves, and some of it's pretty magical stuff. There's actually one instance where I was told that the guy started reading the path of the soul, and he said, oh, that's wrong. So he chants a mantra, and the text all changes on the palm leaf. I'm like, okay. So there's clearly angelic stuff going on here that's far beyond our linear left brain technocratic world. And that's always what struck me is the difference in people's personalities and traits and how it showed up in the astrology. Absolutely stunning.
Do you have any personal insights as to how or why that might be? Why our linkage to the time and place in space? Like for me, one of the things I thought about was spooky action at a distance, quantum entanglement. At some point, we're all closer to each other than others. And as the world has gone out, we've been looking at and studying the stars. And by mapping those kinds of things, you can kind of see things that we're more connected to than others, or energies that might affect us a little bit more. But I've never, that's just my own personal experiences and working with it. Do you have any personal things that you thought about?
Well, I don't know if I fully understand that question. Exactly what are you asking?
Why the energy actually, how astrology is so accurate, why we can actually read it and figure out why that energy would be affecting us.
Yeah, I get it. Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, now I get it. That's what I thought you were asking. I just wanted to be sure.
Absolutely.
That's a really good question, because I think, the old model was gravity. Everything's gravity, right? Forget gravity. That is certainly an element and a critical element of astronomy. But when we start getting into this stuff, I always say, forget Trinity, Neo, and Morpheus. I think the ancient Hebrew and the Vedantic stuff tells why. See, in every planet, they assign, once you get prior to the 1600s or thereabout back, it's actually a little before the 1600s, you start getting into many of the authors. There was a lot of them, like Schirner and all the way back, and Firmicus Maternus is very old. These are all medieval. And then you had Guido Bonatti. There's I could sit here and rattle off a bunch of them. They're amazing that we have translations.
I can see our listeners going out and Googling right now all of those names. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of good places to get that. And there's some good sources, and a lot of translators have been busy. See, the three guys I mentioned earlier, the three Roberts, Zolar, Schmidt, and Hand, started a project called Project Hindsight, which was originally kind of sparked, I don't know if it was totally sparked, but by Olivia Barclay. She's long gone, but she revived William Lilly. William Lilly is a 16th century astrologer who was an English-speaking traditional astrologer. I call him the caboose. Here, I can actually show you what he looked like. A lot of people can get this book, and it is, let me see if I can get this guy up here. I'm going to have to fire what is it here? A little presentation, then I can get him. Yeah, here we go. So, William Lilly, as you'll see here, is he's a pretty good astrologer. I like him a lot. That's him right there. I just went by him there. That's William Lilly. So he was born in 1602. He died in 1681, and he wrote a pretty formidable book. It was called Christian Astrology. He probably called it that so he didn't get his butt waxed by the church. But the interesting thing is it's all about interrogation or horary astrology. It does have some natal in it, but this is a look at kind of the end and the death of traditional classical astrology. Because after him, that's it, to my knowledge. He really, I'm sure there were people practicing it, but he's the last one that actually published something that beheld the traditional methodologies. And it was really good. And see, what's interesting, and I know this might be a roundabout answer, but what interrogation astrology is, for those, a lot of people may have heard of, all these types of astrology. See, there's birth chart astrology, which is your natal birth chart. Now, you can look at that in Vedic astrology, or you can look at it in tropical, and they will be different. You have location astrology. Location astrology is amazing. This is literally maps. And the older method's actually better, where you cast charts where you're going to go after you find on the map what's good. That's a really interesting astrology. I do a lot of that every day. In fact, in all my readings, I always include location astrology, because people love that stuff. And it's so accurate. It's creepy, because not only do you have your birth chart, but you also have transits and progressions. See, like, this is a location map. I just fired one up right now. And wherever you have a planet, you're going to find that energy is very, very substantial. And of course, you can go all over the globe. You can look anywhere in the world. You see Europe and Southeast Asia, South America, all over the place. You can just go right, anywhere you want to go. And the wonderful planets are always Sun, Jupiter, and Venus, and the challenging ones are always going to be Mars and Saturn and Pluto. So, and it's absolutely amazing. And then you have aspects which are very detailed. Like, watch, it's going to look like spaghetti. See? So these are geometric aspects. Well, these things all have proximity effects. In other words, the closer you get to them, the more powerful they are, and the farther away you get, the weaker. And this is where latitude and longitude and GPS and Google Earth and your iPhones and your droids really pay off in modern times, because you can specifically pinpoint certain cities and geographics where you've got good lines, and you can avoid the bad ones. And all these horizontal lines are ley lines that are specific to each individual, and nobody's going to have the same location astrology. So not only do you have that, you also have transits and progressions. Like, I have a lot of people who call me up and say, well, I had a reading and the person said it was perfect there. I say, yeah, but you got a progressed, Saturn coming in. So you can watch these things actually move. See, if I look at it, you can actually see them moving. See? And they're going to move over time. Yeah, well, and then the transits really, really move. So, I mean, you literally can animate transits and progressions. Look at how fast all that stuff moves. So,
all right.
Yeah, that's location astrology, which is stunning. And then you have one of the most ancient and probably most usable types of astrology. A lot of astrologers don't know about it, some do, but it's called horary, or my favorite word is interrogation. Now, if you go to India, it's called prashna. And people go, okay, well, what is that? Well, that is asking a question. You don't need to know what time you're born or what city you're born. You just ask a question, and you can ask a question about anything. I've been hired by treasure hunters. I remember I had one guy, he flew me out, and he had all this construction equipment and these crews, and he was absolutely 100% convinced that he had Civil War gold on his property. And he asked me, he said, what does the chart say? I said, I don't think you got it. He says, well, we know it's here. Okay, then go start digging. I ain't stopping you. So they had like several sites they were going, and he would have me cast charts on each site. And I said, well, you're going to find something here. I said, it's going to be old stuff. It's going to be like iron and old junk. It's exactly what they found. The backhoe started digging, and bed springs and old pots and pans and bottles came out. That's exactly what the chart said. See, and this stuff sounds, and this was used a lot in medical astrology, interrogation astrology. See, so for instance, if someone is sick, you can cast a chart, and the eastern horizon becomes the querent, or the person in question, and the health is the sixth house. And you can tell by all the aspects and the dignities a lot about it. Now, I can't practice medicine, and I always tell people, go to your doctor. I can't tell you what to do, but you can take the information and make comparative notes to whatever you're doing, whether it's through a doctor or a healer or whatever. So, and Ayurvedic astrology is amazing. This gets into so many areas of actually every area of life. You can ask anything under the sun. From, questions about business, people, money, relationships. Like I've had, I just had kind of a tragic situation recently. I don't want to mention with who, but, there was a question as to whether this person's father, who's now deceased, was really that person's father. Mm-hmm. And I cast a chart and said, you know what? I said, according to this chart, he may not have been your father. And then the DNA started coming in, and it corroborated what the chart said. I've had missing people. You can actually do forensics work with interrogation astrology. And this is old stuff. I mean, you can go back to 300 BC plus and see a cohesive method of doing astrology like this. This is the stuff that really intrigued me. So what is it proving? And why did I bring all this up? It's proving the universe is an interactive consciousness with us. And the planets aren't just a bunch of rocks with gravity out there. They might be angelic, multidimensional portals. Now, some astronomer listening to me right now is going to roll his eyes or her eyes, but I can tell you, I've studied astronomy and I have great respect for science and astronomy. I used to teach a physics class and I enjoyed it. And I can tell you physics is real and it's a wonderful science. But most of your really good physicists will tell you sooner or later that, okay, we don't have the answers. What we know is what we know. But when you start getting into the realms of why does astrology work or what is its effect, it really gets interesting because in the ancient world, here, you can actually see this diagram is a little rudimentary, but it'll allow you to at least see some ideas. Every planet on the tree of life has an archangel. So you can actually see here, like Raphael is the archangel of the sun. See, this is the sun. And its name in the Aramaic and Hebrew is Tiphareth, which means God's glory or beauty, right? And you have also intelligences. You have the archangel, the angel, the intelligence, and the spirit of each planet. This is where the rabbit hole gets deep, because astronomy will tell you, well, you know, Jupiter has a certain mass and a certain gas and a certain orbital speed. It's all left brain science, which is very good. And I have great respect for that. But when you look at why is it that I see every time someone has a transit of Jupiter, things are going good. Why? Because Jupiter is not only the largest planet in the solar system, but in its ancient, theology, it rules some of the most powerful angels for good. And you have the archangel, the angel, the intelligences, and the spirits. And there's a lot to that. There seems to be a lot of angels connected with these things. And astrologers will sit there and say, well, it's debilitated, it's retrograde, it's direct, it's trining, it's sextiling, it's all these geometric aspects, which is really good. But it really seems to be that the planets are modulating angelic, you could say, interaction with the reality of the earth. And now when you get into Naadi astrology and the older stuff, they actually say everything on this planet is literally interacting in an energetic sense with the celestial influences, including the fixed stars. And that brings me to a diagram I always like to show. This diagram is probably the best because this is a big bird's eye view of a conceptual view of creation. And so whatever your belief in God is, right? Everybody, unless you're an atheist, believes there's something above us, right? Or you could say some very intelligent, high divine power. Most people refer to it as God, right? So here's the thing. That is believed to be above creation in this particular model. And then the light gets more and more dense, and they say our souls are created right about here. There's no astrology up here. There's no Pisces, no Aries, no ascendants, no any of that stuff, no moons, all that stuff. So this is really divine stuff. And this is an Aramaic Hebrew word called absolute, which is a strange word that kind of means where the divinity or the divine emanation of souls is. These are the classes of angels believed to rule it. And these are more westernized Judeo-Christian names. They're actually Hebrew names. So the seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones. They claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions up here. This is vast. I mean, exceedingly vast. The next worlds down, Braya, is where the waters of creation are believed to get more dense. And these are the classes of angels. Again, 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions. Excuse me. Way down here, this is called the Yetziratic worlds. And there's actually a very, very interesting text in Hebrew called the Sefer, which means book, Yetzirah, which means formation. So this is where the rotating galaxies are believed to be. And our Milky Way could be way down here, and our little solar system's on the speck edge of it. And now notice we start seeing the familiar stuff, like the archangels, the angels, the intelligences, and the spirits, like I was mentioning. This is where the amino acids and the molecules and all the quantum stuff that everybody likes to throw around. It's just, here it all is. So this is where the reality is. Well, here, and they claim there could be 49 parallel universes and 49 subdimensions in each one. Now, I don't know about you, my friend, but that's way beyond my comprehension. That's deep. When you think that there could be 49 parallel timeline universes going on, and that's probably true. We hear a lot of people in the ufology world and military talk about wormholes and portals and time gates and all that. Is it true? Probably. Then you have the last worlds, which is Asaya. Asaya is a strange word for the astral planes. And interestingly enough, they claim there's 49 dimensions and 49 subdimensions here. So astrologers, I always kind of remind everybody, don't be calling people their sun signs as them when your soul is created hundreds of dimensions above the celestial influences. This diagram at least puts a perspective on it that it might be a little bit deeper than that. And the interesting thing is they say the guardian angel or angels from Yetzirah are the ones that actually determine when you're born. When mom's water breaks, the baby's coming out. That's it. That baby's got to come out reasonably soon when the water breaks in a woman. And they say that the celestial timing of the position of the planets and the stars are actually the time that angel ties the spirit, psyche, and soul permanently to the body at first breath. And there's something to that, because there's a text, like a lot of people listen to say, well, how do you know it's true? Well, I don't know anything's true. But on the other hand, there's texts that actually support this. One of the most compelling is the Sefer Ratziel. And that is purported to be the oldest astrology book, at least in the West, that we know that exists. And it seems to date back to what the Bible would refer to as Adam. And it's interestingly enough, take a look at where the word Ratziel comes from. Well, right here, if you look, this is the Sephira, which is just you could say a containment vessel of, if I can get this thing to move here, there we go. See, the archangel's Ratziel. And a lot of people associate this with Uranus, and that may be true, but it's outside of the solar system. And see, this is where modern astrologers and ancient astrologers really differentiate. See, they say time begins from Saturn in. And I think they're right, because it doesn't negate. I certainly use Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto, and I think they're really accurate. But the Archangel Ratziel is believed to have brought a book to the first humans, which of course we associate with Adam and Eve, because they were so distraught that they wanted to, commit suicide. Apparently, it's a story. So Ratziel brought this text that explained that all the celestial influences are these myriads of angels. And in this text, it would kind of blow your mind. It actually talks about, and the Egyptians would salutate this stuff too, and so did the yogis in India. At sunrise, all the angels would change. Noon, they would change station again. Sunset, they would change station again. And midnight, those are the four angles. Any astrologer will know that's the ascendant, midheaven, descendant, and I see. And they would talk about the phases of the moon, new moons, quarters, and full. All these aspects, there's just myriads of angels that would be interacting. Now, the astronomers are sitting there looking through their telescopes, and they're not going to see this. I'm sorry, it's going on a different channel. That'd be like taking a telescope and trying to find your radio station. You're not going to do it. So it's really interesting stuff, and that's what attracted me to this older stuff. Is the religions are all talking about this spiritual component of God and the soul. And a lot of what they talk about is really good. Some of it's dogma. Some of it's been shaped. But overall, really interesting stuff. Because if you look at the human form and you look at this tree of life, look at a human being. They say that same thing is in here. Dad puts the seed in mom's womb, and then spirit becomes manifest on the physical earth, which is sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight. So we're dealing with a matrix here that clearly is an interactive consciousness between us and the celestial influences. And that's what intrigues me. And how is it working? Well, I think you're dealing with a vibrational force that's far above gravity and far off the channel of that. It is stuff of consciousness. You know, you take Dr. Emoto, this is a very rudimentary example, but he actually gave us some pretty interesting stuff when he froze water and found that positive thoughts literally have sacred geometry. Fear, worry, anger, and discord comes out looking like gobbledygook. So most people have seen this, but it's really quite interesting because he never called them this, but they're called thought form elementals. And this is something the Egyptians, the Chaldeans, the yogis in India, they call them samskara. And many medieval people know. Reiki healers know about this, right? And we emit these thought form elementals right out of the third eye chakra. In fact, many people will notice that people in India, they'll go paste a gem right on their third eye chakra. Why would they do that? Why did the kings and the queens wear gems around their heads on crowns? To look cool? No. It was to really increase the vibration on the pituitary gland and the crown chakra. That's why. Very, very interesting stuff. You know, one of the biggest topics right now is artificial intelligence. We're going to see it get like Terminator here. In the military probably already has stuff fairly close to that already. And one of the things that AI is going to we're going to see, you'll be buying a robot to clean your house here in the next 10, 15 years, maybe sooner than that. I hear they already got them. And China already has newscasters doing AI, and you can't hardly tell the difference between the suppressed Chinese, mentality and an AI person. Because, communism always suppresses our, so everyone's trying to act stern and robotic, right? So, and logical, right? So what's interesting is how scary this is right now and how advanced it really is, especially when you have a military that can be funded with, unending money. So, this is really interesting how the sacred stuff really lines up with astrology. You and I will die and so will everyone else, when the moon's south node in eclipses joins your Saturn, and Jupiter joins the north node. When the sun and the moon and the earth align, we get eclipses. And in Naadi astrology, it's stunning. Every single person I ever see that exits the physical plane will have the moon's south node eclipse point, which is called Ketu, join Saturn. It's called liberation of karma. And the ancient astrologers didn't call life life. They called it the dissipation and experience of karma. Very interesting. The ancient Naadi astrologers. So it was a spiritual look at existence in this plane rather than, the totally anatomic, look from the left brain, interesting stuff.
You said that there's a thought that time starts with Saturn. Could you go a little bit more onto that? We actually had a friend of the podcast, Nick Hinton. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. He's big on Twitter, conspiracy theory guy. His first book was actually the Saturn Time Cube Anomaly. And it went really deep into these thoughts about Saturn and what it could be doing.
Yep. In Naadi astrology is very, very interesting. Let me see if I can find this doggone thing. There we go. I want to go to that. The principle is Saturn is the containment vessel of the karmic purpose of why we're born. In fact, this white etheric energy that leaves from death to rebirth and on is believed to carry with all of us. Well, that's out of the Bhagavad Gita. That's just a plate out of the Bhagavad Gita that I snatched and put in there.
Because I don't think I'd seen that one before.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's a very common one in the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, there's great wisdom in this stuff. There really is. And Egypt had a lot of stuff too. So did Chaldea and all your ancient cultures. I mean, like Pythagoras and Hermes Trismegistus. This stuff has always been espoused by all the great thinkers. And back to the Saturn. One of the diagrams I like to show the most is this one. This big, thick dashed line is kind of the demarcation between what psychiatry and psychology might call the conscious mind below here, and the so-called subconscious mind is above. Well, notice what's right here, Saturn. And if anyone's familiar with astrology, Saturn is the cross over the crescent of the moon. See, all the glyphs of the planets come from the seed, which is the circle, and the moon, which is the crucible or crescent, and the cross, which is spiritual manifestation. So the sun is the seed of creation. The moon is the crucible. Dad puts the seed where? In mom's womb. The farmer puts the seed where? In the ground. It nurtures. And then spirit becomes manifest as it grows and releases. See? So it's really interesting stuff. And, we can splice genetics, we can create drones and all kinds of robotics and AI, but try and souling it with spirit and soul. Not going to happen. Again, back to the AI example, you pick up a glass of water because you want to and you're thirsty. AI does it to look human because it's appropriate behavior, logical, programmed behavior. So that's a big difference. Never going to do it because, the physical body is calling for it and you just desire it, So it's and that's only, one very rudimentary example. I mean, you think about free will to do whatever it is we want to do and ambulate around. It's pretty deep stuff. Again, AI will do it because it's logically programmed to do it. And there's many people I've spoken to who say, yes, but Jeff, we actually create a conscious field around the AI. Well, they do. And it's interesting because if you go back to this model, this is a really interesting diagram. The Hebrews were right. They said that the lower conscious mind is known as the nefesh. It's a strange word that means the present lower conscious mind or present personality. It ain't us. It's the keyboard, mouse, and you could say screen. We're interfacing with our consciousness into this body, which is quite miraculous. But it's not us. It's the lower present personality, and it's driven by the spirit. And all your religions talk about conscience, right? You all have a conscience. You know better than that, right? Well, they're right, because that's where Saturn comes into play. Saturn seems to be the lower. There's names. So they call it Nefesh, Rosh is spirit. And these two are absolutely necessary to be alive. You can't live in a body without them. But it's interesting because these three components are the upper divinities of the soul, and they actually can be separated from the lower Rosh and Nefesh. So this is deep stuff, and there's a lot of ancient texts that speak to that. We hear a little bit of this. Most people are familiar with the Lazarus story, right? Raise them from the dead, right? But they can only live for 7 years. Well, that story actually is told in a few other places too. The ancient Hebrew rabbis could do that too. And some of the healers could do that. They could actually bifurcate the soul and keep the Nefesh and Rosh sustained in the body, but the upper divinities of the soul wouldn't be there. Did you ever hear the term soulless? Well, that's kind of what we're creating with AI, is a soulless automaton. It doesn't have spirit, and it really doesn't have any connection to a soul, only what it's programmed to do. And they actually say the Nefesh starts forming in the womb, but it's very mysterious how all this stuff is influenced. Well, Saturn is the beginning of time because Saturn is basically where time is believed to start, because time is a total delusion when you think about it. I mean, every day of the year is nothing other than I think I lost my diagram here. Let me just see. Yeah, it's this one right here. The day, yeah, let me refire that diagram. The day is simply the rotation of the Earth on its axis. And to the flat earthers, I say it's still a celestial model. The cycle is still the celestial model. So an illumination is a month. A year is a time around the sun. And again, to the flat earthers, I say it's still the cycle that's programmed. And the ecliptic is just the path of the Earth around the sun. See, the sun appears to go south in the winter. We get cold if you're in the northern hemisphere, and it goes north in the summer, and it gets hot, right? So the bottom line is this stuff, and eclipses are very real. They're very, very powerful. So whatever the hell this is, it's certainly a matrix, and that time is believed to begin from Saturn, because Saturn rules karma. And you can see, if you look at this, here's another model. They actually say Saturn is the purpose of this incarnation. Not that the planet Saturn's the purpose itself, but they say Saturn contains the karmic etheric energies of the souls. Like each single one of us are categorized. It's almost like the Matrix in a way, except not by a bearded man, in front of computer screens. It's literally every soul seems to be categorized. And not that Saturn is the library, but Saturn seems to act as the modulator for the life during that time. So it's very mysterious. You see, when you start getting into this stuff, the Yetziratic worlds seems to, and I'm talking the 49 potential parallel universes, not just this solar system and Saturn. I'm talking this stuff gets way past anyone's comprehension, certainly past mine. But the theology is souls were created up here. They fragmented for some reason to be in existence and go have experience in these physical worlds. And we only have Earth. There could be myriads, and I believe there is myriads and myriads, and I know there is myriads and myriads in my heart, anyways. And I've seen evidence of it. There's myriads and myriads of planets and different dimensional solar systems that may be completely different from this one in terms of the physical vessels we would take on, the experiences, and you could say physical dynamics that would rule those planets. Is stunning. And this isn't a theory. You can read about it, and the Rig Veda makes references to this. There's a wonderful text called The Ringing Cedars of Russia. It's a series of texts about a girl named Anastasia who had a man write these books, and her family has lived for thousands of years in the Russian tundra, and they go all the way back to Egypt. And very interesting stuff. And the Hunas in Hawaii, the ancient American Indians have legends to this, the rabbis especially. Again, it's all down to perception, and everyone explains it different. But something clearly is going on, that souls are indestructible and spirits are. And when you enter this realm of existence with these meat suits, you seem to be regulated by Saturn. And we keep reincarnating here for a number of times to either purify and rectify the soul and or to have experience. And, a lot of people listen to me and say, well, how can you prove all that? Well, I can't prove anything. Neither can they. But here's the cool thing. Go to this text. It's called the Sharar Agilgam. Now, that's a text that's not that old. It was actually written in the 14th century by Rabbi Luria, who was the protege of the very famous Ari. For anyone who knows what I'm talking about, this is the Ari means the lion in Hebrew. And a lot of people called him the Arizal. You can see the Arizals, an English translation of the Arizal's work on reincarnation, right?
Okay.
So Rome threw this stuff in the garbage can somewhere between the 1st and the 3rd century. They don't want to even hear about it. You're all sinners, right? You're all going to hell. But this book will blow your hair back, because it talks, in fact, what I was just showing you a moment ago, the Nefesh and the Rosh and the Neshma and all those divisions of the 5 divisions of the soul, talk about literally how we matriculate down into incarnation. And this stuff is deep. It's way past what anybody's going to fully understand. But, to the skeptics, I say, read this book once. And it talks about souls who get trapped, and we call them ghosts, right? People should go to my YouTube channel. I just started a podcast myself on my YouTube channel. I finally did it after 30 years. Yeah, and go there and you can read it. We just did a little bit of a thing on that. But the cool thing is the Sharia Gilgam talks specifically about these divisions of the soul. And there's a great story at the final 40th chapter here about the different divisions of souls. Like there's souls who are angry. There's souls who are mixed with negative spirits. There are souls who are trapped, errant souls, all these different things. And now we get into the whole realms of what we call possession, right? And exorcisms. And I know I've done a lot of this stuff, and it's dangerous stuff. And with properties too, you'll find where murders and suicides, we talked about that on my podcast. And just lightly too, I might add, because you can never cover this subject. But so back to Saturn, Saturn is truly the I believe the beginning of time in this particular time space continuum. Because when you look at what the hell is time? Time doesn't exist. Yes, it does. It's very, very real. You'll find many of the yogis will tell you, oh, the whole physical world's an illusion, right? And I always used to go, well, hit your hand with a hammer and call me on the first of the month. It's not an illusion. It's very, very real. But they're right. They're absolutely right. And all your great spiritual avatars and leaders and yogis and Christ, you name it, Moses, you go in any of them, they all will tell you this world is very temporary. Well, they're very much right. And that's where K2 enters in. There's an ancient story of a demon. Some people call her Ma. Other people will call it the dragon. That's where the dragon legend came from. The head of the dragon is the north node of the moon, where eclipses happen. The tail of the dragon is Ketu. Well, the ancient story was God was giving the planets all their immortal potions, right? Again, preparing a little crib for us to come and play in. So, meaning the souls. And so all the planets got their immortal potion, and this demon snuck in, and the sun god saw that and said, you got to stop this demon. It's going to screw up everything. So they threw a discus at it, and it got cut in half. The head became the head of the dragon. The tail became the tail of the dragon. Now, that's a metaphor, but it's actually really central to Vedic and Naadi astrology, because like COVID broke out exactly when all the planets caused a Kalasarpa yoga. What is a Kalasarpa yoga? Kalasarpa means serpent curse. Where'd the serpent come from? The snake, the dragons, even used in medical. It's the serpentining effect of this eclipses that start at the North and South Pole, and they serpentine around the globe. And, again, this shows up all over. The Chaldeans were masters at this. So were they actually, I've got texts that show and label that eclipses are like birth charts. They start at the North and South Pole, and they can go on up to 1,000 or more years, sometimes 1,500, 1,800 years. And like we just had one this 25th of October, just last week. And guess what? Today, as we speak, Mars is going retrograde, and the echo, which is the full moon eclipse, is going to happen on the 8th, on the midterm elections. And it's a pretty dicey one. You got the alignment of Mercury with the sun, and those two oppose the moon conjuncting Uranus. It's pretty bizarre. And, these eclipses are very powerful, and they tend to really shift energies in a very powerful way. And each soul will experience it differently. So Saturn seems to be the arena that was created from the perception of reality of time. And you and I will die when Ketu aspects Saturn, and Rahu, the moon's north node, very specially aspects Jupiter. And I see it all the time. My mother died at 47 years old in the 80s. And I always wondered, why did that happen? Well, it was right on. She got cancer and died. I've seen people die, at all different ages. And usually you can even see long and short lives promised. I was just examining a person yesterday, 25 years old. Car accident. Every single planet in the chart was aspected by the nodes, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars. It lined up. You can't do this in Western astrology the same way. You can, but the techniques in Vedic and Naadi astrology just is structured to look at the chart in a whole different way. So I like them both. I really do. But it's all about time. Time is created by this matrix on the Earth of this whole solar system. And Saturn seems to be where the soul escapes from Alcatraz. And then it moves on. And it's very mysterious because we marry, give birth to, have relationships with, get either helped or suppressed, exalted or killed by certain people that seem to have this very complex tapestry of karmic interaction. And one of my favorite books to recommend is The Magus of Strovolos. I recommend that book a lot because it's an amazing text by Kyriakos Markides about a man who was a healer on the island of Strovolos. And if anybody's got doubts of reincarnation, go read that book. One of my favorite books to recommend. And the other one is, for the left brainers who say, yeah, well, how are you going to prove this? Well, here's an interesting little thing here. Let me see if I can find where the heck I put it. Might be here. This book right here is one of my favorites to recommend. 30 Years Among the Dead. I recommend this book a lot because this is a psychiatrist who is the man who probably established shock therapy treatment. And of course, we all know about that, right? Still used to this day. And why do they use shock therapy treatment in severe cases of, psychosis and multiple PD and schizophrenia? Is because it gets a result. Why does it get a result? Well, it seems to shock the disincarnate attachment out of the body. It's very hideous stuff, but here's what the story behind this book's morbid title is. Dr. Carl Wicklund graduated from the Chicago School of Medicine. I think it was 1916 or 1918, long time ago, and did not believe in anything that wasn't science, right? If you didn't talk science to this man, he didn't want anything to do with it. Didn't believe in spirits and souls. It was all nonsense, right? So it takes a lot to become a psychiatrist, even today. I know I have some really wonderful clients that are psychiatrists, very smart people. And, it takes a lot of work. You got to be an MD, then you got to go to psychiatry school. So the bottom line and in terms. So he graduated with all these high honors, came to Los Angeles County Mental Institution at the birth of Hollywood. I think this was like 18 or 20, 1918, 20. I mean, this is when Valentino and, Frank Capra and Will Rogers and all those, things were just getting going. This was the birth of Hollywood. So he ran the mental institution and was doing his shock therapy treatments. I don't know, but I think he did lobotomies too. It's in there. I mean, that's some hideous stuff. That's, some like horror flick stuff, So he goes to a party and meets the woman that he becomes smitten with and decides to marry her. And what does she do? Well, she's a psychic channel. So this is amazing because you guys, as fate would have it, right? So he marries his exact opposite. And he knows she's very intelligent and had great respect for her. So what does he do? He undertakes a study to begin to see if she's rational or delusional when she has these channelings. So he puts her under, or she goes under, and I think he had a stenographer. This book is so scholarly written, even though the cover looks, this is the old cover. You can't get this one anymore. The new one you get on Amazon. You want to get the hardcover. It's really nice. And they changed the cover. But this was the original that I had. I really like this one. So anyways, long story short, under her, channeling, he's got stenographers and everything. It's so well written, this book. And all of a sudden, somebody turns to him that takes on his wife's body and says, "You're the one shocking me with this lightning." And he says, "What do you mean?" And the person proceeded to explain this really detailed thing on shock therapy treatment that nobody could have known had they not been there. And he said, "My God, you had to be there." We said, "Well, of course I was there. You were shocking me." He said, "Well, look down. Do you wear a wedding ring and a dress?" And the guy looks down. "Oh my God, I'm controlling someone's body." And he says, "Yeah, and you must be dead as we know it, and you don't know it." And he said, "Well, that makes a lot of sense. Nobody listens to me anymore, and I'm angry and all this." So it's interesting. This lower nefesh consciousness is very close in. If you read the Magus of Strovolos and many other texts, you can see how our lower conscious mind is very plastic. It's like silly putty. It only believes what it believes. And it's where free will really enters in. So he got him to realize his condition, and he goes off into the light, right? And the patient cleared up. That's what started. That's why this book has the 30 years among the dead title. For the next 30 years, the doctor went from linear left brain, shock therapy treatment and lobotomies and all the other medications to, oh my God, we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. There's not another book quite as well written as this, because this book is stunning. There's other books, like Malachi Martin is one. He was actually met with M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled and all that, and warned the church was trying to kill him. These are two really good books. The Unquiet Dead, that's a psychologist, Edith Fiore. Spirit Releasement Therapy is another really good one. So this is all stuff. Again, we see this, we're spirit in these bodies. Leonardo da Vinci's, the pentagram is not the work of the devil. An inverted one is, but it actually proves, see, that's earth, which is dark. That's spirit, which is white. That's fire, which is red. That's air, which is yellow. And that's water, which is the four elements of spirit over matter. See, and the nature spirit's really interesting stuff, because, people don't think this stuff is true, but there's a lot of stuff going on with the physical world. The lower elementals, which represent earth, air, fire, and water, the archangels rule these lower spirits. You have the sylphs and the fairies for the air, the undines for the water, and the salamanders for the fire, and the earth is the gnomes. And people laugh at this stuff in physics, but there might be a lot more truth to it than meets the eye, because any physicist will tell you everything is energy. That's all it is. It's very complex energy. Of course, we call them atoms and molecules and all that stuff. And that's only what we know. And there's a lot being expanded upon that right now. They actually say the fallen spirits, which just ain't the devil, right? Everybody will tell you, well, it's the devil made me do it. Well, it's a little bit deeper than that. This is Lucifer, Satan, Belial, and Leviathan. There's 8 beneath that, and there's believed to be legions upon legions beneath that. Well, the interesting thing is this true? Well, every culture seems to have a story of this war in heaven, and God got pissed off and incarcerated these guys. And they are not just incarcerated in a bottle like we hear, the genie in the bottle. They might be incarcerated right at the very structural molecular level of this universe. Now, if you think about that, an atom has positive and negative, day and night. Everything has juxtaposing forces. That's why they may hate creation's guts, is because they're forced to do it. And they say if the seraphims, cherubims, and the thrones ever quit chanting the permutations of creations, the entire Yetziratic universes would vanish in less than a nanosecond. So something's going on here. It's way beyond Pisces and Aries and, moon and all that. It's very divine stuff. This is a matrix of the soul. And I think there's not a better astrology that really nails it down than Naadi astrology, out of India in Vedic. It's not that I love the Western stuff; it's really accurate. But I think the structural theologies that are in ancient Vedantic scriptures might very well be more conclusive because it wasn't disrupted as much by all the wars.
Well, the more we talk, the more I sit here and think, I'm going to have to do one of these readings with you here soon myself. It's just too fascinating.
You'll never figure it all out. You'll never figure it all out. I love, trust me, I know I never will. The more you learn, the more humble you become. The more you realize there is divinity. This is a wonderful book I love to recommend. This is a rabbi who lived in Baghdad before World War I. This is the 1800s. This is an astounding book. The first 88 chapters is very biblical. It's cryptic, it's metaphoric and all that. Because they say there's many, many layers to the ancient texts in the Hebrew and the Aramaic, and there's the literal meaning, then there's the you could say cryptic meaning, and then there's the meanings of the ciphers, and then there's the magical divine meaning, which no one will ever fully figure out without the help of angelic forces. So he talks a little bit about that. But the last chapter 88 is 200 pages of stories of souls that he would release who were trapped in the lower Asaic worlds. Remember, that's the lower astral planes. We call them ghosts, right? There's somebody in my house. I know there is. Well, they're probably not wrong. I know I've done a lot of clearings, and a lot of times these people don't even know they're dead. And they are very hostile, some of them. I have some great stories on my podcast about that. But anyhow, and businesses, I've seen where businesses have really crazy stuff. Well, here's the cool thing about this book. I love to tell, he has story after story. See what he's got in his hand there. There's what they call ancient unifications and rectifications. Well, what's that? Well, unifications is joining the fragmented soul, and rectifications is purifying the soul. There's a lot of stories in here about angels. There's all these different lower classes of angels. We always hear about the archangels, Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael, which is awesome. Those are very high. But there are many angels down in the lower, what they call dimensions, that actually try and purify the soul. Now, the Hebrews call it klippah, or shells that we interact and intertwine with. That's the serpent we see on the Cassidus of medicine. That the serpent, and that's also the Rahu and Ketu eclipse points, very, very mystical stuff. There's something about this dimension of Earth that you tend to get intertwined with these guys in some small capacity in order to even exist. Now, that's very interesting stuff. So, in fact, they have to be involved in life and death itself, it sounds like, and they're forced to do so by the upper divine angels. So this is really deep stuff. But anyhow, in this book, he would have souls begging him who are trapped for, many incarnations and in inanimate objects, animals, etc. Stuff sounds crazy, but it's true, I believe. I really do, because I know I've experienced some of it. And they would beg to be freed. So he would do these unifications and rectifications, which, by the way, folks, are in the Psalms. See, the ancient Psalms, they smacked them in between, and also the Old Testament. And there's also other prayers that can be used that release the soul. This is what Exodus is all about. See, Jimmy Page used to have a sigil on his guitar amplifier that was one of the goetic spirits. And, what is a sigil? Well, check it out. Sigils are literally these, where they are drawn by the Aramaic and Hebrew and numerology to signify an angel, a spirit, and intelligence, and so on and so forth. It's deep stuff. And it was well known, and still is well known, by a lot of secret societies. And this representation as a vibration that was put on talismans or worn on medallions for protection or what have you. So deep stuff. And, again, look at here. These are commutation tables where you've got planets that are the line of the good. Look at the line of the evil. And these are all different codes that would interact with various attributes of the angel spirits and intelligences and archangels. So deep, deep, deep stuff. Again, we're busy over here, building computers and, splitting atoms and all that. The ancients were busy looking at the angels that created them. Pretty interesting stuff. And a lot of this has been lost. And this stuff goes down the rabbit hole really deep. See, in the Bible, there are codes and the Psalms. A lot of people don't know this, but the Psalms are almost 4,000 years old, some of them. Psalm 91 is pushing 4,000 years old. It goes back, I think, to like 1870 BC. I mean, let's do the math here, folks. And that's a guesstimate at best. I certainly don't know, but that's conjecture by a lot of the theology, experts. So, and historians, but deep stuff. I mean, you go to India, there's like thousands of documents in the Madras library. Nobody can even figure them out. Nobody knows how to translate them. It's all Dravidian, Tamil, and Sanskrit versions that they don't know how to put it together. And pretty interesting stuff. So there's a lot going on here. This is an age of science and expansion and left brain growth. And it seems like the earth has gone through this many times before. And when humans get too nuts, the divine seems to cause catastrophes. We hear of the floods. We hear of, the Sodom and Gomorrah, stuff like that. That stuff absolutely may be true. And many of the people right now researching Tartaria, I'm sure you've heard of that, might be a lot more truth to that than we know. And there's something divine here that's really bolting this all together. Anyways, just to finish, not to wander around too much here, but the Finnish Yehuda, I want to tell a really brief. Yeah, Yehuda has a story. Like, you read this book, you blow your hair back. He actually summoned certain angels that came to him. He said, "I want to see what you look like." And they said, we won't manifest ourselves to you. And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because we're ashamed." And then he got a hold of the upper angels in the Yetziratic world through a prayer and said, "Can you give them permission to manifest to me?" And they did. And they didn't have knees, and they had big, long, droopy noses, and they only stood upright in the astral plane. And he says, "We're ashamed." And he said, "Well, what do you do?" He said, "Well, our goal is to export souls from certain lower dimensions up. And a lot of times we have to beat them with these fire sticks, not to hurt them, but to actually cleanse the soul. It's like a dirty carpet, you used to see mom beat them on the clothesline, right? Get the dust out. So that's what they do. And of course, people perceive that sometimes as hostile violence, and the soul will escape on the astral plane into things. Well, he would find these souls and he would do releasement prayers. So this book is stunning. Anyways, long story short, there's one story I love to tell. It was about a young man he found trapped who had been through several horrible incarnations. And he read his soul and found out that the last lifetime was, again, a series of murders. And it all started when he was on his way home. And I think it was the 17 or 1800s in the first incarnation at that particular where it went awry. And he had made a bunch of money and he was coming home to help his parents. This is, again, in I think Baghdad. And he stopped at an inn and went to pay the bill. Of course, back then it was gold, right? Not fake paper money. And he reaches in and grabs the gold piece and hands it to the innkeeper, right? And the innkeeper's noticing he's clinking around a lot of gold, right? So he hands him the key, goes off to his room, and the innkeeper leans over to his young son, says, "Here's an extra key. You get in there tonight and you get that gold." He says, "We'll split it." So the young innkeeper's son goes in, grabs the bag, just about out the door, and the guy wakes up. They get in a big fight, and the innkeeper's son ends up murdering him. It sticks a knife in his neck, and that's it. So he gets the gold, right? So the young innkeeper's son ends up just like Patrick Swayze in Ghost. He's pissed, he lost his life. And he ends up at the Yetziratic world. And the angels say, do you forgive this man? No, I don't forgive that son of a bitch. I want him to get just what I got. So boom, right back in incarnation. And this is mysterious stuff because, people say, well, how can this be? But, I've ran into stuff like this. Is really interesting. So he ends up growing up in that incarnation. And folks, you got to remember, for some odd reason, the angels block us. See, this big, thick dashed line blocks us from understanding our past incarnations. You can go to a psychic astrologer and get some ideas of what it might have been, but you're never going to fully remember every detail. Not a chance, especially not in our conscious everyday lives. So we have free will. And this big, thick dashed line, they actually say, is the demarcation. All of us have this. There's a little thing called Cupid's bow right underneath your lip. We all got it right there. And that line, they say the angel makes to make us forget where we've been. That's mysterious. Why would they do that? Well, I don't know. But the only thing I can tell you is that that story is in a text called the Sefer Haggadah, which is an Hebrew text that actually says exactly that story. The angel makes the mark to make us forget. So he grew up in this lifetime, ends up murdering now the old man, because it's 30-something years later, who's the son who killed him in the same room he was killed.
Wow.
So, yeah. And, if you start delving...
Got exactly what he wanted.
He did. And this is interesting because it's like the Hatfields and the McCoys, and we hear this story by many of the yogis, the Christian stories, turn the other cheek. Well, it doesn't mean maybe accept it. What it does mean is realize that it's actions that if you keep re-engaging in, you're likely to get what you wish for. So so it doesn't mean you have to agree with anything that's being done wrong to you, but if you rise above it and realize that's person's free will action, and even though it's wrong, it's your reaction to it that changes the karmic implications. Now, that's something called raising your vibration, right? Rationalizing that, hey, I can get a gun and shoot the son of a bitch too, but what's that going to get you? You see, it's just going to entangle it more karmically. And these things are going on constantly. We see it all the time. And the Puranas in India are very fascinating. That's a series of texts. There's so much wisdom once you really look at these Hebrew and ancient Vedantic texts. It's stunning. They actually divide souls into various classifications, even though it's not that simple. But they say there are some souls here that are really ignorant. They're just like little kamikaze pilots. They're just here doing crazy stuff. We hear about it on the news every day, right? And then there's other souls, and they're programmed. Some of this mind control acts on these kinds of souls. And then there's other souls who are just lustful. They want power. They want to control. They want sex. They want, money and power. And that's fine too. They're all here just enjoying the fruits of the earth. And then there's souls that are much more advanced. They're the ones that are becoming enlightened, and they realize that this is all temporary. You can have all you want, but there's costs to engaging in it on certain realms. So this kind of stuff is saying exactly what the religions have been trying to do. But the religions, I think, in some ways, have really been thwarted by the ancient controllers. And I don't know that there's anybody in Rome or anywhere else that's consciously done this. I think it's been systematically done for thousands of years to keep humanity suppressed. I read something the other day. I was at the Reagan Library, and I'll read this to you, and you'll get where I'm going here in a minute. In this, I think it was Stalin, our Russian Stalin. He said, "We don't care if we kill 3/4 of the human race, as long as the 1/3 that's left is communist, believes in communism or follows communism." Now, think about that. And we're at this same fascist place again, where they want a new one world order, right? This is what's really going on. Everyone is, all the Republicans, all the Democrats. Carlin was right. You have owners. They print the money, folks. They're at the top of the pyramid. And I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, pay attention to what they're saying and what they're doing, and their actions. Know them by their fruit, right? So this is interesting because if you look at humanity in history, I think Stalin killed, I don't know, like 35 million people. Hitler might have killed 11 million. Mao in China, there's estimates he could have killed 75 to 100 million plus people.
I was going to say the low end estimates are 50 plus. I mean, it's crazy.
It is crazy. I don't know, but what is this thing? Well, communism could really be extrapolated into demonic possession, and there's a force here. The people are just a surrogate outputs, and they're put in positions of power. And it's very interesting because we hear all these stories of sacrifices and blood drinking and all this crazy cannibalism and human trafficking and these crazy cults. And is it true? I think it is. I think it's been true for thousands of years, and it's been going on for a long time, folks. The interesting thing about now is the United States, I know there's all these rumors about the Masons, and that may be true now. I don't know. But I don't believe that about all of them, because I've had a chance to get around a little Masonry. And its tenets were originally good, I can say that, and very mystical. But our founding forefathers, you take Washington, a lot of mysterious stuff around that guy. He was shot at in the French-Indian War. There were bullet holes in his hat, in his coat, shot 2 horses out from underneath him. Every officer with him was killed except 1 or 2, I forget. And he was fighting for the British. This is in 1762. And what happened is they couldn't figure out why he wasn't dead. And one of the Indian chiefs said, "We see a great spirit warrior over you." In other words, a spirit that's protecting you, and you're going to lead a great nation to war. Now, remember, then Washington was fighting for the British. He was a British officer. And then, of course, the Tea Party and the taxation and all that happened because, Britain was losing the war with French, and they lost so much money. I don't forget who won ultimately, but it doesn't matter. But they went broke, funding these wars. Sounds familiar? Sounds just like today.
Oh, yeah.
Ukraine.
Military-industrial complex, anybody?
Yeah, right. Here you go. So what happened is this Indian chief told him that, and in Washington, I think it was like 22 years old. It's in the history book. They actually took this out of the history books. They had his coat and his hat in a museum because he should have been shot. The places where the bullet holes, he didn't have a mark on him. So it's very mysterious stuff. And then when you look at, he broke off, and of course, the Revolutionary War started, and the Declaration of Independence in 1776 and all that. So that was, when you look at the military strategist, I don't know, I'm not a military, but I've heard he shouldn't have won that war. The American Revolutionary Army should have had its butt kicked. And they were doing guerrilla warfare and all that, but they shouldn't have won strategically by the supplies and the ammunition and the artillery and all that. And yet they won. So Washington was a pretty interesting guy at the very least, let's put it that way. And when you look, and where I'm going with all this is, you look at the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's not another document in my knowledge in human history that is well thought out. And if these New One World Order bastards can take America down, flood the borders, create chaos, and short circuit the Constitution, I think we're the last spoke in the wheel before it collapses into global tyranny and communism. And these New One World Order people love China. They want barcodes on your forehead. They want digital currency. They want, everything we're saying right now. We're on Zoom. Wave hi to your buddies in China, as well as the computers categorizing everything I'm saying right now. There's no one in a cubicle listening, but they have computers that parse everything you say. They don't care where you shop, folks. They care what you think. They care what your psychological background and profile and square box.
Make models.
Exactly right. So we're in a really creepy space. in history. And the astrology showed this. People used to ask me on radio shows, Jeff, what do you think of the Mayan calendar? And I said, not a single thing. Can't come up with nothing for the Mayan calendar. Save your money and your ammunition, but watch out for 220 forward, because 2020, we had a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And you could have set your watch to when COVID came out. It was exactly when COVID came out. And we also had a Kalasarpa Yoga, which means all the planets were in between the moon's north and south nodes. And those happen frequently throughout history. And every time they do, something really crazy happens in the world, like assassinations and so on and so forth, and wars or pandemics. I think the 1917 pandemic happened right during one of those two. So we get these Saturn-Pluto conjunctions every, about 35 to 45 years. It's not exact. They're not exact, but they're close. And we always see tyranny move in on those. It just happens. And that's exactly what happened. Yeah, it was COVID, and they all told us to put face diapers on, right, and get your injection. But it was more than that. They saw that was a portal of time to strike, and they did, because they did a lot. And then, speaking of George Washington, we had a Saturn-Jupiter great conjunction. See, there's Saturn, the timekeeper. Whenever Saturn and Jupiter join in the sky, that's a very significant thing. Now, most astrologers will say, well, that happens every 20 years. Well, they're right, it does. But there's only certain times called the great conjunctions where they align in fire signs. That happened right at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, when in 1762, right on the spring equinox. What happened, folks, since then? Electricity, steam, mass manufacturing, the kite, Benjamin Franklin, all this stuff. So everything was just accelerating at an exceedingly powerful pace from that point forward. And of course, look at where we're at now. I mean, my God, it's stunning. I mean, we've got the whole planet paved, and what we don't have paved, we're flying around. So it's amazing. So here's the interesting thing. On the winter solstice of 2020, we had the next mutation conjunction, which was about 240 years later. Not exact, but close. And that is ushering in a high-tech age, unlike we'll never see. What we saw in the Industrial Revolution is going to happen exponentially now in technology, genetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, travel, energies, etc. And these new One World Order boys knew that. I think they struck too soon, though. They got too zealous. I mean, to put an idiot like Biden in there and Harris, collectively, they can't tie their shoes. And I could tell you that they really kind of screwed up putting them in there, because they should have put someone slicker in there. I won't mention names, but had they done that, we'd be in a lot more trouble. It's so blatant right now. It's so transparent. And this midterm election is huge, and it shows.
I was just going to ask if you had some thoughts, because you said there was the full moon comes up right on there, right?
Right on there, yeah. We had an eclipse. The Chaldeans call it Saros cycles, 6 south. They call them Saros cycles, and that's just what they called them. And they actually really ingeniously had all these eclipses categorized. Well, this eclipse series we're in right now is really violent. It's a Mars-Pluto opposition. So, and we're seeing a lot of violence and anger seething here, but it's also about seizing power. And the full moon eclipse is the real trigger point. Trust me, they're going to manipulate this whole election. Even the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department's been lining up his deputies saying, we are going to stop all this ballot stuffing stuff and really monitor as much as we can. Everybody's watching a lot more. Clearly, this is going to be an interesting time. Anything could happen here on that full moon eclipse. A lot of people are saying we're not going to have an election. I think we will. I really do. We're already having it. And but I think they're going to manipulate it a lot. There'll be a lot of dissension. But overall, it does look like the House and the Senate is probably going to head the other way. And that not that I trust the Republicans either. Everybody's bought and paid for. When
Every
someone
single
shows
one.
up, every single one. But there are good ones, though. There are good ones. And there's some good Democrats too. So it really is who's bought and paid for. When somebody shows up at your house or your office and tells you, here's $500 million, IRS will forget your name, you get the keys to everything, you do what we tell you to do, your life's going to be opulent. You don't do what we tell you to do, we're going to kill your family, we'll destroy your life and make your life hell. So it's really kind of like that. And you're not dealing with, the mob here. You're dealing with people who own the military, own the government. These are some bad hombres. And I really think it gets into demonic stuff. I truly do. Because communism, in my opinion, is demonic. It really is. I mean, when you look at what it is, it's no freedom of speech, no freedom of anything that we're used to in the United States. And that's why everybody wants to come here. And they gotta destroy this country in order to get their new one world order in. And they got to put in their digital currency. And the question is, will they succeed? They're going to cause a lot of trouble. They're really trying to get a major war going on right now. They're even talking about putting the draft in. Of course, they talk about that a lot. But it's interesting times. And
it is.
What was it?
I just said, yeah, it definitely is interesting times.
Oh, yeah, that's to say the least. If the Naadi astrology is right, I show this diagram a lot. You got to put up with my handwriting here, but this is the Naadi astrology of the United States. This July 4th, we just had a Saturn progression. Saturn is the ruler of karmic energies, and it just went over the United States air trines. So this black box is the inner United States chart. So this is the air trines. And you can see the United States has Jupiter, the Sun, Venus, and Mars, and the Moon all in that air trine. So we got today, as we speak, Mars is retrograding over that air trine. And the eclipse new moon happened on the Libra, and it's going to happen on the sidereal full moon between Libra and this here, coming right up on this air trine. It's going to happen. The full moon actually happens in Gemini. That's where the moon will be. And of course, the sun will be back in Libra. So this is really, really deep stuff and very, very powerful. This, of course, is in the sidereal zodiac. So people talking tropical will see it in a different signs, but very, very, very powerful stuff. So it's going to be an interesting scenario. I get by January, Jupiter hits a 12-year progression starting this January of 2023 for 12 years over the United States, which means Jupiter is always the divinity. It's the crescent of the moon over the cross, and it aspects the United States Mercury and ascendant. Plain English, I think we're going to see legal things happen, particularly with the Supreme Court. Look at the New York court just reinstated every worker, military, police, back pay. This is the kind of stuff I think we're going to start to see. If the Senate and House gets one, I think it will. I think you're going to see Biden, I don't think is going to complete his presidency. When he was inaugurated, George Washington, it's interesting, these Masons, they always had the inauguration of a president right around noon. Why would they do that? Because it puts the sun at the midheaven. And the better inaugurations always had the sun making a good aspect. Well, when Biden got inaugurated, he actually had the sun conjuncting Saturn within 3 degrees. Well, by primary direction, that actually means 3 years. I don't think he's going to complete his presidency. He's either going to get taken out. This is not a hangman's gallows here. That's actually a man lowering the cornerstone of the Capitol at a Masonic ceremony at a good astrological time.
Huh.
That's Washington, D.C. That's actually, you can see it a little bit. There's a big cornerstone he's lowering there. So
Very cool.
this is a mural of it. Yeah. So these guys were really, Benjamin Franklin said nobody would do anything of importance, coronations, creation of a town or a castle, unless they did it at a good astrological time, because it puts the energy in play. It's really, really interesting. See, the United States has a Pluto return going on. This is the United States Sibley chart. That's called Sibley because there's a man named Ebenezer Sibley who was purported to have recorded this. And I know a lot of astrologers disagree with the time, but he said that the bells started ringing about 5:10 in the church, and everybody was dipping their pens in the ink wells. So if he's right, and he might be, but what I'm about to show you is not going to matter. The United States is going through a Pluto return. That started when Putin went in to destroy the labs. The second hit was this July, and the third and final hurrah is right at the end of this year. So to give you perspective on this only happens every 245 to 250 years. And when the Roman Empire had its first Pluto return, it divided. It split up, and the second one destroyed it. So these cannot happen to a human being because Pluto takes so long to go around. But the United States is probably in its most dire times in its existence. And, it's very mysterious why the owners have the clowns in Washington shutting down all of the petrochemical industry. We're about ready to run out of diesel fuel. Though I think they'll keep it going, but it's really dangerous. And, if there was ever an attack on this country, other than the nuclear-powered devices, what are you going to do? Push the planes on the runway? And use a rubber band to fling them in the air and glide them around? I mean, everything runs. If you don't have diesel fuel, you will not have trains, you will not have trucks, and you will not have planes, and you won't have heating oil, and you won't eat. And people say,
it's a lot of things. Yeah, you can cook on gas, but
how are you going to get the gas?
How are you going to get the gas? How are you going to get the food? How are you going to get the supplies all through? Yeah, everything.
So what's really going on here? They're doing the same thing to Europe, and this crap that Putin shut off the gas, and they blew up the damn pipeline so they would cause this. See, they need economic mayhem, total collapse, in order to institute a new system. This is where they're going with it. They want a new system. I mean, Iraq is sitting on fortunes of oil. That's all capped off. They're all over there just squibbling and squabbling with their turbans on. And I mean, it's this whole crap with Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. It's all white noise. We are sitting on, I've heard estimates, we have enough oil in this country to run it. I mean, they said we could run not only us, but a good portion of this world for the next 200 to 500 years. And that's, no one knows for sure, but it's stunning. And do you know that the oil fields seem to replenish themselves about every 100 years, 90 to 100 years?
I hadn't heard that.
Everyone says, it's fossil fuel. I don't think so. A lot of scientists
decided to make an appearance here. Sorry.
What's that?
Didn't mean to
Rockefeller
got
no, it's okay. Rockefeller got the anybody can hear this on the internet. Rockefeller got the label of fossil fuel because he knew oil was so plentiful. He wanted to raise the prices, and if everyone knew it was that plentiful, well, geez, we can't charge that much for it. So you got to make people fearful it's going to run out. Well, and I mean, this is science. They actually say a lot of these fields that were drained start coming back. It's an organic process. It's not dinosaur bones and fish shells. And it's pretty magical.
So I definitely would like to know more about that. I know with this one coming up, you said, when does that next hit again? End of this year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is tropical. This is tropical because there's a big war between all the astrologers. Everybody thinks their system's right. And I say they're both right. It's very mysterious because the tropical seems to be the more denser layer on the physical plane, and the sidereal seems to be more the deeper soul movements. So I just clicked something here called the precession of the it's called precession correction. That's what that abbreviation means. So when I say, okay, now we've changed the United States to a sidereal reference point. So the Pluto return technically doesn't start in sidereal until 2024. So this country is either not going to be here as we know it over this next couple of years, or it's going to be the phoenix rising out of the ashes. The other thing is we have a Neptune square Mars. Now, that one, last time that happened was right before the Civil War. See, they want chaos. They want dissension, but they can't get it like they had before. That's why I think the divine is going to step in here. That's what that Jupiter progression I was talking about. I think we're going to get saved here. I don't think the United States is going to totally be lost. I think, what are they going to do? Throw the Constitution in the garbage can? People will revolt. They will.
And that's the thing is, do they? I know that's the big question.
They're working on it.
It's not going to be North versus South this time either. It's division in the cities, everything, rural versus city, and it's just going to be a cluster if it goes that direction.
Yeah. Oh, you bet. Absolutely.
Well, I know I've taken up a lot of your time so far. I really appreciate you hanging in here with us and doing all of this. Is there any last words you wanted to share? Or
I would say, what's important right now is get out there and vote for what you believe in, even though, they're going to manipulate it. And they always do. Like Newsom, they had to just sign him in here in California. You can get an honest election here. I mean, all the mail-in voting, forget it. He's in. Why waste the money? Just sign him in. Because it's really kind of a shame. And I think when people look, you're conspiracy theorists and, an anti-patriot if you say anything. But that is actually patriotic to have that's the most amazing thing in the world. Do you know in China right now, they take people, strap them to a chair, and beat the hell out of them, and then stand them up with producers to admit their guilt. And if they're not satisfied with the take, they'll run you back in the room, smack you around a little bit more, run you back out for your guilt. See, this is just like the Rambo movies. It's communism. Mm-hmm. And do we really want to go there? See, they know they can't get this place, the United States, here, unless they create so much chaos, shut it down, starve us out, all of this, all these techniques. You can see it's very transparent what's happening. I mean, it's very transparent. And this is just what the astrology says. We are in by far the most dire times ever. And I think we're going to get through it. I just think we need to people need to wake up and see what's going on. This is at the top down. The Fed is no more federal than Federal Express. And Wilson gave it to him. Thomas Jefferson said it best. He said, if anybody ever gets to print our money, they're more dangerous than any standing army. Well, they did.
Yeah. We haven't been on the gold standard since the 70s.
Well, that was Nixon.
Yeah. I know the last thing I wanted to go on there, I know you'd mentioned Rome. They were around 250 years. The British government around 250 years. We're at that mark right now where we're coming into this dire time with that return coming around.
Sure.
And it's just one of those things.
Oh, we're here. And you're dealing with people, we hear about Schwab, we hear about Soros and Gates and all that. But these are the lower men on the totem pole, the ones who really control the systems at the very top and the secret military. It's interesting. You hear comments from generals like, well, if Russia uses a tactical nuke, we'll just take out his whole fleet. You know what? They actually can. I hear they got secret weaponry right now that's way beyond nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons were cool 80 years ago. And yes, everybody wants one. And they're very devastating. But they've got stuff right now that is eerie from what I hear. And, I'm not claiming I know everything either, but the little bit I hear is stunning. And, I really think there's divine protection on this because there's too many souls here. And I hear stories about very mysterious things happening, call them UFOs, call them angels, that seem to interfere with stuff like this on a massive scale. So it's very interesting what goes on here. this planet is definitely the soul cauldron.
I like that. The soul
Yeah.
cauldron.
It's kind of what it seems to be.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you again, Jeff, very much. I appreciate you joining us here, and I look forward to doing a personal session with you, and maybe we'll have you back on. And
Sounds good. All right. Well, thank you so much.
thank you. You have a great day.
You bet. Thank you.
Thank you again for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Exchange, and I want to once again thank Jeff Harman for joining us this week and sharing such an intriguing topic. Last but certainly not least, I want to give a special thanks to all of our listeners. You are the reason I continue to make these podcasts and keep spreading the word about the amazing benefits of Awaken Vapes. Please tell your friends about us, follow us on Spotify, subscribe on YouTube or wherever else you're listening, and please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Every podcast says that because it really does help. You can also support us on Patreon or connect with us on the social media of your choice. We are at Awakened Exchanges on Facebook and Instagram, and at Awaken Exchanges on Twitter. Thanks again for listening to Awaken Exchanges. Have a blessed day.